And of course, we are recording on, what are we at? May 22nd. So we're like 11 or 12 days from the end of the session. So I really appreciate you taking time in this particularly hectic moment. But there are people all around, like you said, eighth largest economy in the world. There's people not just around Texas, but around the country and the world wondering what's going on. So I really appreciate you taking time to share what's going on here. But before we jump into the legislative session and what's going on in the moment, let's start at a little bit of a higher level. You're born and raised in San Angelo, a real sort of energy hub and energy center. You've worked on energy issues throughout your career, not just in the legislature, but before that. Tell us a little about yourself, your energy background, and what energy means to your district.
Well, of course, energy is important to everybody's different district wherever you live.
Yep.
But I've been fortunate. I was born and reared in San Angelo in West Texas. It was a smaller community back then. After we had a Air Force base, a Goodfellow Air Force Base, and my father was stationed there during the war and met my mother, and they married, and I came along shortly thereafter, and so I enjoyed a upbringing of sports and outdoors and enjoying hunting, fishing, all the things young men tend to do. And I was fortunate to have been blessed with a little bit of athletic ability, and I was able to come to the University of Texas on a football scholarship.
I
But
did not know that about you. You played football. You see what years
yeah,
football your team.
my freshman year was 1965.
Amazing.
I've had some good coaches. Emory Ballard was my high school coach. Spike Dykes was my
Yeah.
linebacker coach.
Legend. Yeah. We
Back
went to
then,
Tech then, right?
uh,
Tykes was.
Spike went on to Tech,
Yeah.
but he was a linebacker coach there for San Angelo Central
All right. All right.
back in the early '60s, and then I went on to Austin, where Darrell Royal was coach, and
We're gonna have to do a separate podcast of just Darrell Royal stories. We'll do that'll be the follow up one.
that'll be fine. That'll be fine. But I had some knee injuries that kind of limited my playing ability. But I went on to stay at the University of Texas after I got my degree in finance. I was able to get into the University of Texas Law School,
Mhm.
um, and was able to complete a Juris Doctorate degree there in the early '70s. And it's kind of it's amazing, Doug, how life throws you lemons from time to time.
Sure
You
it
try
does.
to make lemonade, as the story goes. But I was going to take a job with the Security and Exchange Commission in Washington after I graduated. But the day I finished my last law school exam, my father was killed in a plane crash
Oh my god.
and left my mom, who was, and you'll know this term, she was a June Cleaver mom who didn't hardly drive.
Uh-huh.
She managed myself and my sister, and so when my father was killed, she needed some help, and so I took a job with a small law firm there in San Angelo, and quite frankly, that changed the direction
Sure.
of my life, and I don't regret any of that. So living there in West Texas, I was able to appreciate kind of the changing economic landscape that is a rural lawyer. When I first got out of law school, we had the Arab uh,
Mhm.
oil embargo back in '74,
Mhm.
and so um, the area responded by trying to find and produce oil
Mhm.
back then, and so I did a lot of oil and gas work.
Yeah.
I represented a lot of operators who were getting into the business. We drilled a lot of wells. Some were successful, some were not. But as the peaks and valleys go, uh, there's a boom bust in every oil cycle.
Yeah.
And so our world ended in October of 1983 when the
Mhm.
First National Bank of Midland failed, and most every operator I know had to file bankruptcy. So I did a lot of bankruptcy work
Wow.
during that period of
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and along that same time, I got into uh, uh, digitizing, if you will, all the deed records in Tom Green County, and I created a title plant in order to have a computer that would produce those records in an expedited form. And spent a lot of money and bought a lot of very expensive equipment that turned out 5 years later to be worthless. Uh,
So you have seen kind of the expanse of the energy industry in Texas. I mean, from the oil embargo through that bust in the 80s and obviously a lot in between, but all the way through to the shale revolution. I mean, you've been there
I've been
for
there
all of it.
I've been there and done that, as they say, and I did a lot of bankruptcy work,
Mhm.
but I've done a lot of real estate work, a lot of real estate, what they call landmen,
Mhm. Sure.
the new series landman. Well, that's what a rural lawyer does, and West.
Maybe not exactly what's in the show,
Well,
but
s some of it might be a little exaggerated,
perhaps.
but yes, I have been associated with that. So I've been an oil and gas lawyer
Yeah.
for, almost all of my legal career, 50 plus years. And so we've seen it.
Mhm.
We've watched it develop. We have watched it mature
Yep.
and then disintegrate and reemerge in a reconstituted form. And that's what's happened in the fracking boom, as they
Yep.
say.
Yep.
And so that has revolutionized and taken producing zones that we knew were there, but were too tight, quote, did not have the porosity necessary to produce in paying quantities. And so the new completion techniques opened up those new horizons, and
It was just unthinkable,
it was
and,
unthinkable.
not even in the early days, just like 15 years ago, it was kind of unthinkable,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And so areas of this state. I remember reading projections that said the Permian Basin would be played out
Yeah.
by a certain date. I can't remember what that date is right now,
Well, yeah, it was all those discussions around
uh,
peak oil and yeah, yeah. You
we all realize that in most producing zones, under current completion techniques and production techniques, you can only recover about 50% of what's in the horizon, and so
Mhm.
these new completion techniques have allowed us to seek and improve production and increase dramatically that production to make the United States and certainly the Permian Basin the center of the oil and gas production world, if you will, with regard to our economic and strategic security
Absolutely.
here in this country.
It's interesting 'cause, you're talking about the oil embargo in the '70s with some of the stuff going on in the world right now. I think, a lot of the oil producing world in the Middle East, they would love to be able to have a similar dynamic, and they can't because fracking really did kinda change that game. Of course, also in your district, and I don't know if it's part of your business or not, but just so, like, it's part of the district and it's part of what you've seen out there, this rise of wind really kind of in the yeah, about 20 years ago, really kind of taken off through the early 2010s and even mid 2010s and kind of leveling off. And then the solar boom happened in the last 5 years. The most recent podcast I did was with Glenn Hammer, the president CEO, Texas Association of Business. And one of the things we talked about was I think there's a lot of folks, particularly those that are pushing the various negative proposals, that a lot of times are viewing this as like oil and gas versus renewables. Like it's, like it's a football game and we got different jerseys on and we're lining up across the ball. I remember on one of those bills in Senate Bill 819, I believe the gentleman was from the San Angelo chamber, if I'm not getting that mixed up, and said, like, look, we got a lot of oil and gas, we got a lot of renewables. They work together on projects. Oil and gas buys power from renewables.
Absolutely.
It's not a us versus them thing out in San Angelo.
No, it's not, and we are a very diverse region. Clearly, we have a lot of land, and that has a lot of radiant heat associated with large swaths of land. We have a lot of wind,
Mhm.
and certainly we have oil and gas production. And to use your football analogy, I look at it as if we're going to score,
Mhm.
then it takes a whole team to
Mhm.
score, and it takes somebody not only it takes somebody to snap the ball, but it takes somebody to block and tackle and to run the ball. And so I look at all of the portfolio of energy production as part of that team. I look at oil and gas as certainly have a critical importance, certainly in my region, but also equally as important is solar and wind. And what we're seeing today is the co-location of those type of generative capacity with battery backup.
Yep.
uh, that helps with dispatchability and other issues, reliability issues that we're faced in delivering uh, affordable, reliable power to people who need that power. And so San Angelo in our area is particularly well suited for that. And so I'm an all the above guy.
Yeah.
And I tell people it takes all of us working together to deliver this diverse portfolio
Yeah.
that we have.
Yeah, I really do love the sports analogies because they really do kind of work. You don't want just one type of player on the field. You need the fast guys, but you also need the big guys to block and tackle, like you said. And I hear people talking about, well, we're just going to build out a ton of gas and we'll just run our grid on gas. And I hear some people say it's going to be 100% renewable, and I kind of hear both of those things, and I'm like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you use the strength of the different resources that are out there and put them together in a
Absolutely.
mix?
Some are very nimble,
Yeah.
some are quick, some are speedier. They get
Some are cheap
some are cheaper.
and not exposed to the ups and downs of that boom and bust cycle. Because when it booms, prices go high, and that's good for the state. You're exporting a lot. But if you got a whole grid based on gas, consumers are going to hurt under that scenario.
That's exactly right. And so I think if we're going to be smart about this, then it takes all these players to have a perfect team. And that's what we're trying to achieve with a perfect team is this integration, if you will,
Sure.
of the energy portfolio into a fully functioning, efficient team.
So let's talk about that from a policy perspective. Well, maybe first of all, kind of if you want to flesh that out a little bit more, like what's your vision? I like to ask this question, sort of a common question I ask the guests on the pod is like how what is your vision of where energy's headed in 5 to 10 years? And just kind of related to that, like what kind of policies do you actually need to get to that place?
Well, of course, my role as a policymaker is to try to provide this pathway, if you will, for private industry and people who want to invest in this state to have an ability to do that in a cost efficient and a timely fashion. With all the population growth that the state is seeing, uh, these needs are ever pressing forward and needing to respond quickly and efficiently.
Yep.
This combined with the revolution in technology, with AI development, and the need to make sure this state is prepared for that and takes advantage of that. We have to have policies that encourage and enhance and incentivize that. And so, where I see us energy, I see oil and gas has an important role to play. Certainly, natural gas in generation is always going to be critical. Uh, but there are other aspects of that too. I mean, we've got a wonderful opportunity in nuclear.
Yep.
There is a small modular reactor currently being developed in Abilene.
Yep.
There we currently have large load generators here, and they continue to play a role. I don't know that we're going to see another one of those type of facilities built, but certainly
A big nuclear
a
plant,
big
but
nuclear
the small
project.
ones
But the
will-
small ones, absolutely.
and so you're a supporter of HB
Oh,
14, which is
absolutely. And the effort to expand our nuclear capability and understanding is critically important. It's critically important because it ties into the other uh, ever pressing need in this state, and what we talk about a lot in the legislature is water.
yeah.
And without water, then all of this really doesn't matter, because if you don't have water in this state, then you don't have people. If you don't have people, then you can't develop these resources. I tell people that the last time I checked, they don't raise beef cattle in the back of the HEB in San Antonio. Nor do they grow cotton in the back of the Men's Warehouse in Dallas, Texas.
Right.
But they have people that want to live in cities, and they want to eat, and they want to wear clothes, and they want to have electricity. But these resources are developed and managed in rural Texas, so that they can be delivered to people who want to live in urban Texas. So if you want to live in cities, then you have to allow people who live in rural Texas the ability to have basically 4 or 5 things. You need to have a good education system. Mama's not going to want to have their kids in a poor performing school, so you got to have to have good education. You have to have good roads to get your goods and services, food and fiber, hide and hair to market. You have to have good health care. Mama's not going to want to live in an area where her kiddos don't have access to that quality health care. You have to have water. And we are water challenged, certainly in West Texas. And then you have to have good jobs. Okay. Part of those jobs are what we've been talking about this morning, is energy jobs. That's an important component of that. So with those pillars, if you will, of what it takes for people to live in rural Texas, then we can deliver those resources to urban Texas. And so that's the challenge. So energy, again, plays an important part of that, not only for jobs, but for support for schools and other institutions that takes us to live in rural Texas. But I see a proliferation. And so I think nuclear, from the standpoint of certainly these small modular units, I think it helps solve another problem. And that is the water need that I've spoken of. Oil and gas production with fracking have developed enormous amounts of produced water that comes back from the formation. Not only do you inject it down in the fracturing process, but you produce back much more than you put down, and you produce back oil and gas mixed therein. You separate that out, and you have a residual product.
And it's water that at this point can't really be used for anything, but could be if you had power to actually clean the water.
Absolutely. We know what this water consists of, what sort of chemicals, what sort of solids. We know how to treat that water to clean it up, to make it reusable. The big challenge is energy. What is the energy source to do that? How much, where's it located, and what does it cost? Provided it's located where we need it and it has an affordable cost, then operators should be incentivized to treat that water to a level of reuse so that we can utilize that water source, as opposed to throwing it back down a hole at deep depths where we have seismicity issues.
Right.
We
So
have,
it's actually like a double win, because you don't have then the seismicity issues, which are a problem right now, because you're getting some even like 5 point something
there were,
earthquakes.
I think, a 5.2. And that's clearly a
So you deal with that problem, but then you also have water to grow things, and
where we're running out of places to put the water. Quite frankly, East Texas, they have been receiving Louisiana water for a number of decades.
produced water
From Louisiana coming to Texas to dispose of it. And so we're seeing some of that happen in West Texas when you have New Mexico water being brought to Texas for disposition. And certainly we have oil and gas production here in this state that needs to do something with the water. So from a policymaking standpoint, we need to see how we can incentivize operators to spend the extra dollar to treat that water so that they can reintroduce that water into the hydrological stream of the state,
Make it
both literally and figuratively.
Yep.
Because
Mhm.
because and so we have to create liability protections. Say if you're doing it right according to the permits, then absence, gross negligence, you're covered in that um, process. We have to figure out again the energy, where it's going to come from. So these small modular nuclear units, I think, are particularly well adapted to simply locate them where we have large amounts of produced water. Let's accumulate that water in a centralized processing location, and then let's treat it to a level people out there may be thinking, well, won't drink that water. Well, I can assure you, I have had a glass of that water
Mhm.
and it has no taste. It's like drinking distilled water. They can make it so clean
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
and pure that it has no taste to it.
I think nuclear potentially could be very important for that. Obviously, it's going to take a little while to develop nuclear. You could also potentially use renewables for that as well, particularly because like you don't necessarily care when you're cleaning that water, right? You don't need to do it necessarily. There might be some processes that need to be 24/7, so maybe some nuclear, some storage, some gas, whatever in the mix. But generally, that's kind of a variable process. So sunshine and bright rather than just wasting the energy because the lines are congested. You could actually use that to clean the
Absolutely.
water, and you get the water savings from the renewables too, because a lot of other forms of generation use a lot of water, but
But
solar,
renewables don't.
right?
And
Right.
so, yeah, the symbiotic relationship between cleaning up produced water and renewables is clearly there.
Yes. Yeah.
They're locatable to where you need to use that electricity for that cleaning process. So that is very encouraging. And we saw a fight on the floor of the House this past week about the surface reservoir, the Marvin Nichols Reservoir in East Texas, and but you've got 10 million people that live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that need to drink. And
This has been an issue. I used to be a staffer in this building 20 years ago.
oh yeah,
They were
no,
talking about all that back then,
oh yeah,
and way before that too,
when
right?
I first got here,
Yeah. Yeah.
we were talking about the Marvin
Yeah.
Nichols Reservoir,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it continues to remain a problem, but I see a bright future for energy development of all sorts, and we haven't talked about geothermal, which I
Yeah.
think is
Yeah.
particularly compelling. We have brine mining. We have certainly we have the ability to develop these resources where and co-locate them where they're most efficient.
So these are all things I want to talk about. But before we move on to those things, I just want to I want to drill down just a little bit more on something we were talking about um, related to your district. Could you just give some examples of where? 'Cause I was talking about the gentleman from the San Angelo Chamber. I think his name is Michael Looney.
Michael Looney,
Okay,
yes, very.
so he's talking about how energy development of all kinds, like you're talking about rural Texas needing healthcare and schools and roads. Can you give some examples from your district of where renewable projects have brought benefit to local school districts or local governments?
Absolute,
Mhm.
Doug. I can tell you that we have been blessed.
Mhm.
We have seen very large projects come to this region. One is located just adjacent to the city of San Angelo. It's a little bit north, a little bit west of San Angelo. It has it's a solar project, but it has a wonderful component of battery storage.
Mhm.
And literally, this project, 1,000+ acres, is located right next to a residential subdivision
Mhm.
in close harmony with it.
Mhm.
I toured the facility about, a month before the session began, and this whole facility is being operated by two people.
Mhm.
Two people
Mhm.
are able to manage that, and I had never understood this, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do understand. I thought the battery component was simply there in an emergency situation to help dispatchability. That is that's too simple a view of
Mhm.
it. When I asked the operators, "How often do you discharge?" and I expected once a week or something like
Mhm.
that, they said, we charge and discharge 4, 5, 6 times a day.
Yeah.
And we do it, and it's all price motivated, where we see opportunities to discharge at a favorable rate and then charge back up at a lower rate. I had no idea about that capacity, but those are the type of innovative working techniques
Yeah.
that make these projects viable and important. We had hundreds of people were used in the construction of the facility. The project generates millions of dollars for our tax base there in our county, and the ETJ for the city of San Angelo. It also generates royalties for the family that owns that land, and they have a 30-plus year relationship with that farm. And, here's the beautiful thing I tell some of these farmers or ranchers that are considering this. I said, they're basically renting your surface.
Mhm.
They're renting your surface for a period of time. They're paying you a bunch of money to do that. But at the end, they're going to be obligated by contract to remove every bit of that. And
The land is
it's your
yours.
land back.
Yep.
And not back. You're gonna be able to achieve whatever economic value at that point your land can produce.
You can repower with new solar panels, or you could decide, well, there's something in the market that's really making more money than that. I'm going to do this instead.
They're not taking your land.
Mhm.
They're just renting your land for a period of time. And so I think at every level you want to look at this. This is a project that doesn't take a lot of water,
Mhm.
doesn't take any water that I could tell, or very little water, but it generates revenue, it generates employment, it generates tax base, and it benefits our grid and the people who live and work in our region.
And can support a lot of these large loads. We've talked about desalination. I want to talk about some of the things you're working on this session. You've got some bills related to transmission. You've got some bills related to large load. You mentioned geothermal a minute ago. I was going to ask you about each one, but in the interest of time, like what do you want to talk about? What are you excited about?
Well,
I'm talking about all of them or one of them, whatever you want.
I'm excited about all of them, to tell you the truth. Now, some of them, as this process shows you, and you know this,
It's always crazy in the
some
end.
some
over here.
some are destined for success, some are destined for review, but wind up short of the goal line, and some never had a chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's just kind of how the process works. But I feel good that we've had a, a very strong relationship with trying to fix our transmission process.
Mhm.
I have found it to be inefficient. Uh, I was around when my first session in 2007. We had just approved as a legislature. They had approved the CRES project,
Mhm.
which invested $6+ billion in a transmission to rural and West Texas and North Texas, but yet there was no generation. We've seen a proliferation of generation that came.
With private investment, right? A lot of people, I think, don't understand that. They think, "Oh, the state's paying all this money for wind and solar." No, no, that's private investment, and there's actually a study by some UT researchers that CREZ investment saved 20, $30 billion because depending on what year you're in and what, like we were talking about earlier, what the price of gas is, 2022, we saved a whole lot of money because Putin decided to invade Ukraine and price of gas skyrocketed. And thank goodness we had all those renewables to keep prices somewhat reasonable.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And we made the infrastructure investment, and in my travels representing the state of Texas, either through the Energy Council or other forums, when I talk about transmission in this state compared to transmission process in other states, their jaws drop down.
Yeah.
They haven't built some transmission projects in 20, 30 years. Some of their states have. We have a workable transmission approval process. It is not as efficient as I'd like it to be. I've worked on trying to make it more efficient. I've tried to put in goals where we study other things other than uh, cost. I mean, there's got to be some economic benefits associated with it.
Yeah, because what I think, so you have House Bill 3069, and one of the things that does is, as I understand it, we have these tests that are basically the only transmission projects that really get through. There's an exception or two in the last decade, but really not more than that, are the quote unquote reliability projects. But as they talk about it, the Public Utility Commission, former Commissioner Kobos used to talk about this a lot. What is today's sort of economic problem? Like, we're not building lines because there's an economic case. We wait until there's a reliability case. But what's today's economic problem becomes the reliability problem tomorrow. If you don't, it takes a long time to build transmission. If you don't build it because of the economic case, then you end up running into a reliability problem. And guess what? Now you got to wait 6 years for the transmission line, and you got to. So we're literally dealing with this in South Texas right now, where they're building lines, but they can't build them fast enough, and we're in a state where we really could have energy emergencies because of the congestion on a line that has a lot of wind going through it, a lot of gas going through it, but not enough capacity on the line.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the key word, congestion cost.
Yeah.
And that is a real cost to consumers by the failure of this process to deliver enough transmission to accommodate the generation to where we need it. Somewhere around $2 billion a year is what it costs
I think it's
consumers.
like $7 billion over the last
And
three.
and there are 16 to 17 generic transmission constraints currently in this state. And think of that as a road monitor, a bridge monitor, ERCOT being a monitor saying there's only so much traffic can go over this bridge at a certain time. And so when they restrict the traffic, two things happen. Number one, it makes the number of cars on the other side of that constraint less efficient. They have to sit there idle and burn gas or be not paid for their gas. And then on the other side of the constraint, the cost to get the energy needs the people need is expanded. It's increased. So to me, that's inefficient. We need to incentivize it. And going back to the what we're trying to do is to make sure that cost horizon is extended beyond the current 3 years.
3 years is crazy. Like, what? You can't build anything on a 3-year horizon. We'd never build a house. We'd never build a commercial building. We'd never build a road. We
don't build big projects based on a 3-year return of money. I mean, you got to look. Industry looks 25, 30 years out on how they can cost recover investment in assets, and so that is the current situation, and so we're trying to change that dynamic and look at different things.
Yep. So, I want to ask you about a couple other things too. You mentioned geothermal before. Definitely want to ask you about that because we've talked about a lot of the different, like, nuclear and solar and storage, but geo is one I'm pretty excited about. You indicated a minute ago you were too, and I know you've carried bills on this. So this is like one of the innovations that's really come from shale, right? From drilling. It's the same technology being applied. Do you see any? I mean, I think the legislature last time, and I think at least one or two of them were your bills, passing bills to. It's not, there's not like necessarily incentives or anything like that. It's just kind of removing regulatory barriers, right? Is that kind of where we're at with geo at this point?
That's right, and we have again, Texas is well suited for geothermal development.
Best suited.
And certainly along the Gulf Coast. And I think, aren't you from the Valley?
I'm not. I'm actually originally from St. Louis. I'm one of these people that got here as quick as I could, but I've been here 30 years.
All that against you, okay. But anyway, particularly the Valley has wonderful geothermal opportunities, all that chalk region in South Texas. And interestingly enough, the Big Bend area,
and East Texas. There's a good resource over there too.
It's true. So I think geologically we are well suited for that, and we're deploying techniques that the oil and gas industry already deploys in finding hydrocarbons. They can now use that technology to drill just a little bit deeper and to install equipment that allows us to have closed loop geothermal equipment that will certainly be reliable.
Yep.
It's always going to be there.
Base load and
Baseload, and it's able to respond as the need develops. And so we just need to make, my job as a policymaker is to make sure that the regulatory playing field, if you will, is level, that there are not any penalties associated with the orderly development of that, as long as you're doing it in a safe and efficient manner, and that we have appropriate regulatory oversight where we're not patting the baby to death. But we have a gentle touch, if you will, to make sure they're doing it right and protecting the environment and certainly our population.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge, and so we want to make sure that that playing field. And so my last couple of sessions have been to try to level that playing field and set the table, if you will,
Yeah.
for people to invest. Now, there are some wonderful projects in South Texas right now, the McAllen Ranch. There are projects there on the ground right now that they're developing data for to demonstrate the practical applicability of that.
I think we're really going to see this boom. And when I said we're the best for it, I didn't mean geologically, because obviously there's places in the West that have better geology, but we have good geology here for it, but we have the expertise, right? I think a lot of these companies are already headquartered here. We're going to see a lot more headquartered here. I'm really excited about what geothermal will mean for the state.
Geothermal is located where the people are.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of transmission requirements associated with that. And maybe out west, you may have a wonderful geologic opportunity, but there's no people there. You'll have to build transmission to where the people need it.
Let me ask you about large loads. You had a bill that's trying to get large load flexibility. It's House Bill 3970. I've done a couple of podcasts on large load flexibility. This seems like a really important issue, and whether or not that specific bill passes, this is an important. I mean, we talked about it already with desal, but I think you're going to see it with all kinds of different loads, whether it be data centers. Some of them have to be 24/7, 365, but some of them have a lot of flexibility. All kinds of different loads that'll have flexibility. Can you talk a little bit about what you're trying to do with that bill and why you think that's important?
Exactly. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Doug. You did a podcast recently with Arisha.
Yes.
I think I pronounced that.
Arisha, yeah, you got
Arisha.
it. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I listened to it. I recently printed out the scorecard, if you will, between my 3970 and Senate Bill 6, which is the two bills that are focused on large load and how we get that large load to market. And so I'm particularly pleased with how she scored my bill, and I do think it provides the flexibility that this policy needs. So that bill, I know we're taping this today, but from my perspective, that Senate Bill 6 will be on the floor of the House Friday of this week, and so we'll be watching that and hoping to shepherd that with the chairman Ken King on that. And it passed out of the State Affairs, which I was happy to lay out and vote for. I hope that we support that on the floor, and then we support that as it moves over to the Senate, and we have a robust discussion about the relative advantages of the concepts laid out in Senate Bill 6, which I think there's some great things in that. I think our bill is good. I would like to blend that together and take the strong points out of both and come up with a policy. We need the policy now. I mean, this is not a hypothetical problem that we're experiencing.
No, this
is a very real problem. We have very real investors that want to spend billions of dollars in this state, and they require electricity for their operations. They want to come. They are willing to bring their generation with them. So how do we blend that with a fully functioning grid that we all depend upon? How do we blend that and allow them to come on? And what do they bring with them?
Yeah.
Do they bring generation with them? Do they bring flexibility with them? Do they bring technology that allows to reduce their load demand and contribute to the reliability of the grid and what effect does that have on the grid. That coupled with the process to figure out where what their attributes are and what they can add to the grid is critically important. And how do we incentivize that? How do we have this demand and integrate it into a fully functioning grid system efficiently and timely?
Yep.
Because they want timing. They have other opportunities. They can be anywhere in this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And other states are bidding on their projects to come to their state.
And Texas has advantages, right? We have this abundance of renewables and gas, storage. Like they I think they want to come here, but we got to meet them part of the way. And I really do think it's really kind of this yes under these conditions, right? It's not a yes under any conditions, but that's really what the like bringing the power, having the flexibility, and just like you were talking about with that solar and storage, where storage is being deployed 4 or 5, 6 times a day. These loads can, especially if they have batteries on site, even if they don't, some of the loads can actually just move up and down to help with grid reliability and cost and all of that. So it's kind of that yes if approach is what.
Yeah, and I think certainly your podcast with Arisha, I pull this factoid out that y'all kind of analyze it with an 8-lane highway, and you don't need all 8 lanes from time to time. You might need it occasionally, but you need to operate more than just in the first 2 or 3 lanes. You have to operate in lanes 4, 5, 6, and maybe 7 in that regard. And so I like that analogy. I think clearly we built the grid on to have reliability in 2 or 3 instances in the whole year where we have really hot weather or we have really cold weather. But how do we make that margin, if you will, that remains underutilized? How do we utilize that?
I mean, that is the thing for the grid, right? It's like, how do you get those peaks where you're really in trouble down, and how do you use more during the times when you got all this extra capacity and we're just wasting energy because we don't have good uses to put it towards, which is at this point like most days of the year. And if you can manage that peak, you could do a lot of productive things with that energy. Data centers, desalination, oil and gas operations, manufacturing, there's a lot we could do with it.
A lot we can do with it, make it all efficient, more efficient, and less costly to consumers. But my job, and hopefully these bills, whichever form they take, sends messages to the investment community that we want you. Here is the pathway. It's going to be timely.
Yeah.
Allow you to plan on that, and allow you to access your project sooner rather than later, and send market signals that encourages private investment to do that.
Yeah, and that regulatory certainty is so important for investors, and I think that's why it's good to have bills like that send a signal. It's also the danger of some of these other bills that are floating out there, where investors are kind of going, "What does Texas want at this point?" So, I think I want to ask you
To your point.
Yes, please.
To your point, I think deregulation. We tried that experiment, and we're currently involved in that experiment. But seems like we don't want to leave the baby alone. We keep trying to tinker with it. And so,
Do we really believe in market forces, or do we?
Yeah,
Right.
I don't know. Sometimes I think, well, we might as well just re-regulate. I know it's a bad one.
Well, it's interesting. There was this New York Times article on what was going on in Texas, and there was a quote there from Governor Stitt of Oklahoma, and he said, because I think he had vetoed some anti-wind bill, and he's like, "Look, if I'm trying to like push down wind, how am I any better than somebody in California trying to push down oil and gas?" And I think I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but like the final quote was something like, "Do we believe in markets or don't we?"
Exactly. And I believe in the free market, and I believe in kind of setting these objectives, but then I want the market to work. Let's keep our hands off a little bit and let the market work?
Yeah.
And are we sending the right signals
Yeah.
at the right time?
Yeah. So what I want to ask you about here is kind of in closing as we're winding down is I did a podcast with David Spence, wrote this book called Climate of Contempt, and it was how as a nation we're kind of moving further and further apart towards the poles. You're obviously a conservative Republican.
But I don't know what that means anymore,
What
Dave.
so can we talk about that? Like what right, first of all, let's talk about that. What does it mean to you to be conservative and where maybe has what it commonly means to be conservative diverged? And what I also wanted to ask was like how do we get to a point where people are talking to each other and actually trying to find productive solutions where, you know, I may not agree with you on everything, but anybody out there, there's going to be some things you agree on. How do you find that common ground? And I just feel like you're one of those legislators that really makes that a point to sure there's disagreements. We can disagree without being disagreeable and we can find areas. It seems to me from the outside, like you're doing a lot of that, trying to find the common ground, even with people you may not agree with on much, and then work with them to kind of build that. I, I'm just kind of struggling with at this moment in our history. Like it seems like we need a lot more of that. Why isn't there more? How do we get more?
Well, that's a lot to
That's
unpack.
a lot to unpack.
But I will tell you this that um, I haven't changed. I was raised in a very modest home in rural West Texas, and I have a lot of values of family, faith. I believe in low taxation, low regulation. I believe in uh, kind of staying out of people's personal lives. I helped organize the first Republican primary in Tom Green County in 1978. So
Wow.
I've been a Republican for a long time. I don't think I've changed in that view, but somehow, some way, the perception of what a good Republican is sometimes thrown up in my face. I believe in that rural values mean something, and the challenges are not always between Republicans and Democrats. They are between ruralists and folks who live in cities, urbanists. Some of my closest colleagues on the floor of the House are rural Democrats who have the same family values, the same needs, the 5 needs that I just quoted
Yep.
you.
Sure.
Um, they all have those needs also, so we have some commonality, and I've always been a part of getting to know the members and find out about their families, what makes them tick, spend some time with them on the floor, and in private settings to where we can find those common grounds. Usually, everybody has children, everybody has you know, uh, job, uh, nuances on what they do and how we can relate on what I have background in, and so I've interestingly enough, in my 10 sessions and 14 sessions, I've never called a point of order. And that may sound, uh, kind of nuanced, but it doesn't mean that I agree with everything. It just means that if I have a problem with a member's bill, then I'll go to that member and say, "Look, will you work with me and try to make your bill better?" And almost always, during all this time, members have agreed to do that. And we've worked together and we found a common ground and we've got the project done. Whatever they were trying to do and I was trying to to help with, it's worked. And so I think that's important. I try not to get on the front mic and the mic too much. I think when I have something to say, uh, because I'm not there often, people will stop and say, "Well, I wonder what Representative Darby is saying here."
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
so, um, so I think that's important, and I believe in good policy. I'm not there for theatrics.
Yeah.
I'm not a social media guy, as you might suspect. I'm technologically challenged from time to time. don't do Facebook or any of those other things. But I think it's important that we have relationships. And to your point about how do we move on from here, we have drifted apart. Our families are not as connected. When I go to a restaurant and I see a family sitting around a table, everybody's on their phone. They're not conversing with one another. I often ask a group of teenagers, are y'all actually texting each other at the table here?
Could just look up and
Just
look at each
and
other.
and say something to them as opposed to texting them. But it's a societal issue, and my children, my grandchildren are guilty of it. And so I think we just need to get back to connectivity, get back to communicating,
Yeah.
being with one another, finding out the wants, needs, and desires of who you're communicating with.
Human connection.
Human connection. I think
Yes.
that's critically important.
Yeah.
And I would hope that political parties would reflect that, that we would be more in tune with our constituents, not just the loud
Yeah.
folks who like to create a scene. They're not interested in solutions. I'm a solutions guy. I want to try to find solutions to problems and not just throw the problems in somebody's face.
So let's kind of end with this, because I think that really summarizes it well. Like what you're describing is really like pragmatism. How do we work together to find solutions? Sort of pragmatism over ideology. And I think that is kind of this key question in these waning days of the session, particularly when you look at some of these anti-renewable bills that would, even as the ERCOT CEO says, we need all these resources. If we don't have them all, then we're going to have less grid reliability. Prices are going to be higher. So it really comes down to, can we choose to work out the solutions and embrace pragmatism, people coming together to find these solutions over ideology? Is that kind of like
Exactly. And
we do it?
I think we've done that
Mhm.
in this session from a standpoint of kind of addressing our energy needs. We've still got work to do.
Yeah, a lot of work to
Clearly,
do. Yeah.
these large load issues remains a problem till we find a solution. Um, I will continue to resist simply an attack on a form of generation just because they may object to it. I think I'm an all the above guy, and I think that's where we need to go. So we're going to continue to work to find that common ground, continue to work to explain the problem, and hopefully, working together, we can find the appropriate solution.
Chairman, appreciate you very much. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for all you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a pleasure being with you.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you for listening to the Energy Capital Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please like, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, have a great day.